Hello, this is Mr. Chabry, and this is a story of memories and my search for one of the rarest children's books out there. Suppose you met a witch. My story actually goes back all the way to kindergarten. We were basically being introduced to the idea of the library, and we were going to pick out a book to be our first library book. And there was one book in particular that caught my attention. So I checked it out and went home. There, my great-grandmother, or what we called her, Ma, would read this book to me. Here's a picture of her looking at, oh, that's me. To be fair, I probably looked more like this during this time. I would have her read the book to me. As I looked at the pictures, I do remember the pictures were very striking. They were something you usually wouldn't see in a children's book. But eventually, I had to turn the library book back in. And this is where, for most people, the story would end. They would totally forget their first library book, and it would be just a footnote in their life. But like I said, since the artwork in this book was so striking, it left an impression. Ma passed away in 1999, and I remember her funeral was the first funeral that I ever cried at. This person that I spent a lot of time with was now gone. All the time we spent together, all the stories we shared, all the memories we had were just that. Memories. And the sad thing about memories is that over time, they fade. So it was about a month ago, I started thinking about this book. Thinking about the book that was my first library book, the book that Ma would read to me. I was wondering if I would be able to find this book. The thing is, it's hard to find a book that you barely remember. My first thought was to just try to look it up on Google. Look up children's books with witches. Surely some sort of art from this book would pop up and I would recognize it, click on it, and find it. But as I quickly realized, it was not going to be that easy. My next idea was to try to draw from my memory what some of these pictures looked like. I vaguely remember a scene where the witch is sneaking through the woods on a dirt road. I also remember a close-up on the witch's face, and for some reason I really remember this witch having a crazed look on her face. Another vague recollection that I have is this picture of a girl running from the witch, and the main thing I remember from this picture is actually the boots, or as I refer to them at this time, swan boots, because for some reason I remember the girl taking swan boots from the witch in order to escape. It was around this time I stumbled upon a subreddit devoted just for this sort of thing, finding books that you barely remember. So I decided to try out this tool. I described the plot as best as I could remember it, being careful to add that the fact that I have not even seen this book since I was a kindergartner means that a lot of these plot points might have been wrong. From what I remember, there was two main characters, a boy and a girl. They are both out in the woods when they get captured by the witch. The boy and the girl use magic swan boots to escape the witch. That's all that I remembered plot-wise. Of course, I did remember that thorns actually played an important part, but I didn't remember how. Unfortunately, the subreddit didn't come through. Only one person left a response, and that response was not the correct book. It seemed like I'm at a dead end now. I may never find this book. But I never really gave up. Every day I would search Google using different keywords from my memory, trying to find at least one picture that would spark my interest, spark a little memory inside of my head so I could find what this book was. And then it happened. A single image caught my eye, and that's when I realized I have found it. I have found the book. I quickly clicked on the image to find out the book was titled, Suppose You Met a Witch. The image in question was a picture of the witch being controlled by a magical flute, being forced to dance, and then inevitably jumping into a thorn bush. I quickly jumped onto Amazon to see if they had any of this book in stock, and it was then when I realized why it took me such a long time to find this book. There were only 4 listings of this book, and all 4 of them were in the $400 range. This was one of the rarest children's books, and I happened to stumble across it when I was a kid. I consider myself lucky, because a few days later there was a listing for a much more reasonable price. And here it is, the book that I spent all this time looking for. The book that happens to be my first library book. It is written by Ian Serralier and illustrated by Ed Emberley. Looking at some of this art, I can see why this book left a strong impression on me. A lot of these pictures have a really strong fever dream-esque quality to them. I'd also like to take the time to compare these pictures to the ones I drew and see how well I remembered them. The crazed witch face was pretty close, as was the scene where the witch sneaks through the forest at night. However, the image with the girl running with the swan boots was actually my mind combining different elements together. The witch is actually the one that wears the special boots, known as the 7 League Boots. My mind had combined that image with the image of the children running through the forest. And the children actually turn themselves into swans to escape the witch. That's why in my mind I thought of them as the swan boots. Now that you all know my connection to this book, the story of me looking for this book, I would like to take the time to read it to you. I hope you all stick around for this. This is actually a very interesting book, and without any further ado, let's go into the book. Suppose you met a witch. There's one I know, all willow gnarled and whiskered head to toe. We drowned her at 10-foot bridge last June, I think. But I've seen her often since at twilight time, under the willows by the river brink, skimming the wool-white meadow mist astride her broom-o beach. And once, as she flew past, with a sudden twist and flick of the stick, she whisked me in head over heels, splash in the scummy water, up to my chin. Ugh. Yet there are witless folk that will say they don't exist. But I was saying, suppose you met a witch, up in that murky waste of wood, where you play your hide and seek. Suppose she pounced from out a bush, she touched you, she clutched you, what would you do? No use in struggling, in vain to pinch and pull. She's pinned you down, pitched you into her sack, and drawn tight the noose. There's one way of escape, one word you need to know. W-A-N-D. Well, what does that spell? They learned it years ago. 2 children, Roland and Miranda, clapped in a witch's sack and trapped just as you might be. He was a mild and dreamy boy, musical as a lark. In the dark of the jolting sack he sang. She was quick in all she did, a nimble wit, her brain busy as a hive of bees at honey time. And Grimblegrum, that was the witch's name, jogged them home. This was the usual sort, a candy villa with walls of gingerbread, porch and pillar of barley sugar. She kicked the gate and the licorice-beaded door, undid the sack string, and tipped them onto the glassy glacier-minted floor. As Roland fell, his boot struck the crystal paving stones and chipped them. Like an angry rocket, she launched at him. Miranda sprang for the magic wand and pinched it from her pocket.
Tip-tap, O house of cake, be a cloud-reflecting lake, with me and Roland each a swan, gracefully afloat thereon, and deeper than e'er plummet sounded, Grimblegrum, the witch be drowned.
'Twas done. Look there, do you see 2 swans? A gliding serene and cool, upon that heaven-painted pool, over the blue sky, over the floating clouds that shine like snow-white fleeces. Sudden in a burst of bubbles, the witch popped up and shivered the cloud to pieces. "I'll gobble you yet," she gulped, but all she gobbled was water, as with windmill arms she thrashed and lashed at them. No swimmer, she would have sunk like a boulder below, had not a felon crow, black-hearted as his feather, swooping and dipping, hoisted her by the belt and borne her, boggy, drooping, dripping home.
She'll follow us, no time to lose, quick, we must fly,
Miranda cried. Heavily they rose, far over the fields and forest, with whining wings all night through, till dawn of day they flew. Meanwhile, the Grimble Witch, now dry, had put on her 7-league boots, and do or die. 7 miles at a step came galloping, gulping, "Gobble you yet! I'll gobble you yet!" The swans heard her cackle, and thudding where she stepped. Down by a screen of trees they swept, down to a lonely roadside out of view.
"I'll change myself into a rose of crimson hue, set in a prickly hedge,"
Miranda said.
"And Roland, as for you, you'll be a piper, and the magic wand your flute."
Not a second too soon, for the witch's boot touched the ground beside them as she croaked. "Oh, glorious, glorious rose, I have sought you from afar. How I wonder what you are. You may mock me from on high, but I'm the spider, you're the fly." Ha 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 ha! And she gaped at the glorious and goriest of roses, with the greediest of eyes and the nosiest of noses. Again she spoke. "Good piper, this rose, how dainty it would look if I stuck it in my cloak. May I pluck it?" "Good lady, you may, and I'll play to you all the while." And Roland smiled, for his was the magic flute, each golden note entrancing, none could listen without dancing. 1 note 1, she spun like a top. 2 note 2, she hopped and couldn't stop. 3 note 3, and into that thorny thistly tree with a hop, skip, and jump went she. Toodle toot sang the flute, and up went her boot, and down again soon to the tantivy tune. Every thorn and twig did a dance to the jig, and the witch willy-nilly, each prickle and pin as it skewered her in, was driving her silly. "Hi! Ho!" shrieked she, and "Tickle me thistle!" and "Prickle-dee-dee!" And battered she was as she trotted and tripped, and her clothes were torn and tattered and ripped, till at last, all mingled and mangled, her right leg entangled, her left leg right-angled, firm as a prisoner pinned to the mast, she stuck fast. Silence, not a sound, as Roland wiped the sweat from his brow. Then gently with his pipe he touched the rose. Out leapt Miranda to the ground. Hand in hand, chuckling through the wild wood, away home they ran. That same evening, a cowman passing by paused by a roadside bush to cut a switch. He heard a cry. Turning, he saw in a hedge nearby a prickly witch who screamed and yelled and hissed at him and spat. So he put a match to the hedge, and that was that.